Welcome into the Viva Albertos podcast. I am your host, Jake Wood, and this week is going to be a little bit different of an episode. Unfortunately, it is a day that ends in Y, and I experienced some technical difficulties, as you've come to expect over the last 8 or so weeks of the show, and this week was really no different, although unfortunately, it was one episode where I couldn't really fight through, and so this week is going to primarily feature questions from Gabe and Scott, and I'm sure for some of you that's a reasonable relief from hearing my drivel and drone on, the regular weeks. But, we'll jump into that. And today's episode, we were joined by Craig Goldstein of Baseball Perspectives. Craig does a terrific job with the projection system. He also does a great job on their podcast, Five and Dive, which you can go and find on all of their streaming platforms. And I highly recommend you go and listen. It'll make you a smarter baseball fan the more you listen to them. And so without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Gabe and Scott, and they'll take care of you for a majority of the show, and you'll kind of hear me at the end as I jump back in. But until then, have a great week, and thanks for listening. And here now is Gabe and Scott's interview with Craig Goldstein of Baseball Prospectus.
I don't know if that's shown in the numbers, though. Just he has a lot of high-profile situations where he strikes out. I don't know if I should save this question for the official thing, but Craig, how much do you
do
have?
it twice?
I was how much do you have to do with PECOTA, or is it just what Baseball Prospectus uses?
So it's our projection system. So I don't specifically have much to do with it. My job is to run the editorial. So like everything that we produce. So anything that we write around it is under my purview, but the actual projection system is generally run by Jonathan Judge. And there are some other people who have their hands in it and stuff like that. And I probably was more involved 5-6 years ago, just in terms of we updated a lot. I mean, like PECOTA, I think Nate Silver originally was the one who produced PECOTA. And he like did it in an Excel spreadsheet, and it's much different now. It's I mean, like 100% replaced from back then. And so in the process of replacing that, obviously a lot can change when you change kind of the basis of the projection system, which was when we started using our deserved run average and deserved runs created and stuff like that. Like that became the basis of what the projection system was both using and outputting. And when we made those switches, those were created metrics, right? So we want to make sure they make sense and stuff like that. I was a lot more involved in like checking every run of PECOTA to be like, is this sane? Is there something insane? Like, are there systemic things that are happening in terms of like, are certain classes of players being overrated or underrated? And a lot of times, like I might see a systemic thing, but it was like, well, that's just how the metric works, and that's we're going to live with that. But it was about kind of like just poking holes if I could, or back checking stuff like that. But like I don't like do anything involved in creating the metrics or the projections themselves. The closest I would come at this point is obviously a lot of all of them use our depth charts. And so I work with our depth charts team to be like, it's a lot of poking holes too. Like I will just say like, hey, I'm just thinking out loud, but like, it seems like this guy is getting a lot more, or is going to play a lot more, or is in this position rather than splitting time between other positions. Like, why don't you take a look at it? You're the expert. We have people dedicated to different divisions, but I'm like, I'm not an expert on every team, but
Right.
And so a lot of like the standings projections are going to lean really heavily on the depth charts.
Well, that's what I was going to ask too, and we might as well just keep rolling with this. Is
Sure.
how often does that get updated and or updated versus published as far as updates go? Because obviously those things can change as plugged into every team as you can be, especially during spring training. Like that feels like it can change pretty regularly.
Definitely. So I mean, I would say something in our depth charts changes every day. I don't know that they're different. So we have basically 3 people, each of whom have 2 divisions. So someone takes the AL and NL West, someone has the AL and NL Central, someone has the AL and NL East. And so we have a Slack channel, and sometimes they'll say like, I've seen this, like I have other stuff going on, I'll get to it as soon as I can. And if they can get to it before, we rerun our simulations. We run 1,000 simulations overnight, every night, to generate the standings projections, which is why there's that decimal. It's not, we don't round it, but you can. But so we run those every night, and it's just whether something gets run or it gets edited in the depth charts to get in before the simulations run kind of overnight. And I have definitely, like when I just did the Cardinals preview this week, which is part of why this was the day that we picked. But when like sometimes I'll be going through writing up the preview the night before, and I'll be like, oh, this DC, like this positional allotment just really doesn't make sense to me based on anything I know. And I want to be deferential. They are the experts, but like I usually do try and dig in as much as I can before I'm going to write a preview. And so I'm like, this doesn't seem right to me. Like I'll go in and change the depth charts, hopefully before the run of the simulations. And then I'll pull the updated kind of graphics and stuff that we use to put it in for the preview. Cause I'm usually up pretty late.
I have your little graph of the playing time, and I do wonder why you have JJ Weatherholt for 65% of the playing time at second.
Yeah, that is them being conservative. So first of all, we generally consider 85% to be full, a full year of playing time, because guys just they rest, they miss games. Like very, very few. You'll see some guys are at 90%. That's like Freddie Freeman, right? These guys who play 160 to 162 games a year. And even though we're not going higher than 90, just because stuff happens. I mean, there's too many guys, stuff happens. There are some guys, obviously, who play a lot year in and year out. But even then, right, the wear and tear begins to add, and you don't know when. So 85% for us is considered full-time. With Weather, my guess is what they would say, I didn't ask them about him specifically, is it's not about doubting whether he'd start the year on the team or play every day, but he's had a number of injuries in his career, right? So he's had the hamstring injury dating back to West Virginia. He's had stuff where what his highest is 130 or something like that, I think, in his career. So, that ends up it's not a full season, right? So I think it's just being overly cautious. They do tend to be very cautious. And so I think that's something where it's like, when people talk about stuff like that, absolutely. If you want to look on a brighter side, like take someone's playing time and amp it up a little bit, and you very well might be right. And we could be, I think a lot of our misses in a project I keep meaning to do and haven't done yet is to take a prior season and take the preseason projections and then retrofit them into the playing time that actually happened across every player that played, and see how close those projections were to the actual standings. Because I think a lot of our biggest misses end up being on playing time. And it could be, I mean, it could just be we're wrong about 65%, right? He's going to play more than that. I mean, he'll play more than that, certainly, if he's healthy. I don't doubt that. The question is, how much is he going to play? Is he going to miss any time? And if so, how much?
The injury point, that's a good point, because I just saw 65% and I was like,
that's low.
I was wondering if you guys didn't think it would make the opening day roster, for example.
I mean, like, I know, like, I've talked to Jeff Jones wrote in our annual, which is, it's over my shoulder, but this is not on the wide view, but he wrote our essay, and like I know he's like 3 weeks ago he was like, like for people who are doubting that he's going to be the second baseman, you need to update yourself on that. And it's I might have even said something at some point to the team about that. And again, it might just be that like I would probably if I were running it, like if it was my specific responsibility, I'd probably go with 75%. Again, considering 85% is considered every day, and factoring in some injury or just giving him some rest along the way, I'd probably go 75. I think they're being a little conservative. That's just probably a difference of opinion more than anything else between me or you and the person who's making that allotment. And it might just be cautious, right? That like if they're waiting until it's announced he's made it, and maybe they'll bump him up at some point there.
Well, I do notice also there are 3.1s for shortstop next to Mason Wynn. Is he one of those maybe? So maybe he's got
yeah. So let me look here. Yeah. So if you go to our depth charts, does this have a chat? Does Riverside have like a? Oh yeah, it does. Here, I'll send just real quick. And this might be, if you're not a subscriber, you might not be able to see it. But
I actually am a subscriber. Yeah.
Shortstop has Win at 85, Fermin at 5, Weatherholt another 5%. So they actually have him getting 5% at third and 5% at second. So he's at 75% playing time in total, 65% at second base.
Okay.
So it's 525. We do it in 5% blocks. So it's 525 plate appearances, which is
that's fair.
It's not a full season, but it's close.
Yeah. I don't think he'll end up playing any third, but
no, now that I'm seeing that I agree. I don't know why he would. That's interesting. I mean, like, yeah, like they have Sagazi at all over, but
which is probably happening.
Which is fair, but also like he'd probably play third before Weatherholt would, right? Like in a situation where Gorman isn't going to play third, like it would be him or Fermin or right. Like there are like if you're fourth down the depth chart, you're just and the starting second baseman, you're just probably not going to play.
And he's back up to Mason Wynn getting hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would probably if I were, and I might after this, I'll probably go to them and say like I would give him 10% at short rather than 5 and 5 as a backup to win, and just take like if you have Sagazi at 5% at shortstop, like he's not. Again, he's like third on the depth chart probably there. Although you never know with the way these teams do it. Like sometimes they don't like to move someone off their position, right? Like if Win needs like let's say he's got like a tender hamstring or whatever and needs a day, they might not want to shift Weatherholt if Weatherholt's comfortable at second, and just sometimes they like to keep the starters where they are and then play the backups all over. So who knows? I would guess they would shift them, but
I think I could see it if like Win just has a day off or something, they might be like, let's just keep him a second. But if Win is hurt if he has
extended, right?
Yeah, he would definitely play shortstop, I would assume.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
So let's keep looking at like the Cardinal stuff and then bring it back to where you're talking about like when to edit and stuff like that. Or is there something that looks off? Do you think there's anybody as you're looking over it that you're like, I think they're either really low or really high on this guy from like taking your realistic take on things?
Just in terms of playing time?
More or like the
projections themselves,
projected PECOTA and stuff like that.
Honestly, when it's hard to find guys. The projections are really sour for the Cardinals. I thought they were. I mean, I was surprised, honestly, how much red there was in the projections in the ultimate, like the positional blocks, like just combining everybody. The guys that it projects, these are the guys that project in terms of the lineup over a league average offensive. It's Burleson, Nootbaar, and Herrera, all of which I agree with, but that's it, and that's a little bit surprising to me. I think what surprised me more was how far below league average a lot of the other guys were. Whether it's Weatherholt at 93, that's actually pretty high. PECOTA is a very conservative projection system. And so something in the range of league average for a guy who's never played in the majors and has limited playing time overall. And that's not a shot at his injuries. It's just he was drafted a couple years ago and he's already in the upper minors. And so he doesn't have a huge track record at any level. And the way these models work, any of these models are going to prefer the most amount of playing time at the highest level possible in terms of feeling the most confident in those results. So even getting to a 93 DRC plus, which is what his projection is actually pretty positive. And I would say you could, if you want to be positive in your outlook, you could say like, if you want to think he'll overperform that, I think there's reason to, and I would imagine the error bars on a projection like that are bigger or wider than they are on someone like, Nolan Gorman has a 92 DRC plus. We have a lot more major league data on Nolan Gorman that's informing that projection. And that is, again, you can quibble with any of these. I wasn't surprised by that. I think he'll be better than that. I've thought he'll be better than that for a while, to be fair. But it's, the way DRC works is it really, if you strike out a lot, you have to hit for power and to balance that out. And he didn't do that last year. It was an absolute power outage. And I know he's a streaky hitter. He can carry an offense for 2 weeks and he goes ice cold at other times. And, I'm going off the top of my head, but was his slug under 400 last year, or is just low 400s? Like he can't strike out 30+% of the time, or 34% of the time, something like that, and have a slugging percentage near 400. Like it has to be significantly better than that. And I think there's something to be said for his staying at third base now. That's his position, right? That's his natural position. He hasn't gotten to play it much in the majors, but that's where he should be. It's probably where he's most comfortable. He was never a second baseman. They played him there because it was worth trying given the way the team was built. But if you want to say he's going to be more comfortable at third base and you want to build in some optimism there, I think that's reasonable to do. But outside of that, I think this is another Mason Wynn, another 93 DRC plus projection. He's performed better than that. If you look at something like OPS plus or even WRC plus, this is just a disagreement between DRC plus, which is deserved runs created. It takes into account a ton of factors, who the pitcher is, who the umpire is, who the catcher is. Like all of that stuff actually matters when you're trying to figure out what a player deserves, right? Because the quality of the competition matters. The quality of an umpire matters, right? If you strike out on an umpire who generally has a very wide zone, like that's a different situation than doing it against someone with striking out looking on a umpire with a tight zone, things like that. The park factors obviously matter. So there's a lot that DRC plus takes into account. But if you want to look at what he's actually done, he's been closer to league average in terms of his actual offensive production. And again, I think you can look positively on that and say, if he can hit the ball a little bit harder, if he can lift the ball a little bit more while hitting the ball harder, there's a lot more upside potentially in there, because his max exits are pretty reasonable. It's just he needs to be getting to them a little bit more frequently and ideally in the air a little bit more often. And, again, you start adding these things on. These are how projections can miss by a lot, if they do miss by a lot. And I go back to, we've been dealing with this a lot lately with Milwaukee, right? We've been low on Milwaukee's projections, and they've outperformed them by 17 games, I think, last year. But before it was Milwaukee, I think it was Baltimore. But before that, it was St. Louis who did it all the time. And during the heyday for the Cardinals of winning every year, I think they did a lot of the same things that Milwaukee does now, which is they cycled off of players who weren't performing, and they had a lot of depth, right? They had a lot of guys that they could turn to that were in aggregate the same quality player as the guy that they were replacing, but maybe the guy they were replacing was in a bad headspace or in a cold spell or whatever. And you can cycle off those guys onto someone else who, if they perform at their baseline talent, is still an improvement because they're not on a cold streak or something like that. They're an average hitter. But if you get a hot streak, all of a sudden you're way outperforming your projections, and you can ride that until it dies and then replace them with someone else. I always remember like Greg Garcia back in the day, right? Where it's like Greg Garcia was not that good, but they got 6 great weeks out of Greg Garcia every season somehow, right? And it wasn't always a 6-week stretch. Sometimes it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and a week, split up over the course of the season. But their ability to do that and have a lot of guys to cycle through and turn to is something that's really hard for a projection system, and also specifically, we've been talking about the depth charts. That's hard for them to be able to deal with. And you see it with Milwaukee, right? I mean, they're able to play Isaac Collins, who plays out of his mind for 4 months, and the second he hits the skids, they stopped playing him in September, and they played someone else. And that's the benefit of depth. But if you're a depth charts team in the beginning of the season, you probably can't predict Isaac Collins in the first place, and B, you can't predict how long that's going to last, and then that they can cycle off him, when they need to. And you end up probably going into the season saying, yeah, they got this guy. He's on their 40-man. He's from Colorado. He's older. I'll throw him 10%, right? Like, he'll probably play because they play a lot of guys, but he played the vast majority of the season, and he did it well over his head. And that's how these misses on the depth charts and on projections add up, because when someone plays over their head, they play more than the projection is going to. And when they undershoot their projection or just underperform in general, they're going to end up playing less than we might have allotted them. We have guys we project, our projection for Victor Scott is really bad in terms of his offense. It's 70 DRC plus. That's 30% worse than league average. But we project him to play a lot because the Cardinals are probably going to play him a lot. I mean, as it stands right now, the Cardinals are and should play him a lot. But if he's 30% worse than league average for 3 months, they might try Nathan Church, right? They might try somebody else. And all of a sudden our I don't know how much we allotted to Victor off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean 80% of his of the playing time at center field.
Sounds right.
If he's bad, but if he's truly awful for 3 months, they're going to send him down, right? And they're going to play someone else, and we're going to miss 30% of the playing time somehow, and it's going to go to someone else. For the Cardinals this year, that might not matter, but it matters a lot for teams in different parts of their win contention cycles and stuff like that. So I know I just rambled an absolute ton, but I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So speaking of Wynn and Scott, though, I was curious about one thing about their projections. Offensively, I understand why they would be low, and I don't really dispute that. Like, how much? Like, I don't understand the defensive aspect of the overall WAR, because Wynn seems really low at 1.2, considering last year he had a 91 weighted runs created plus on Fangraphs, and he ended up with 3.5 WAR by Fangraphs. And then Scott had not much better than a 70 defensively, and he had like a 78 or 77 or something like that, and ended up with 1.7 Fangraphs version of WAR. Granted, Scott had like a really, really up there defensive season where any projection system is going to significantly regress that naturally. But I still feel like the defense should be better on both of their projections.
Yeah. So and that's absolutely reasonable. So Wynn is a case where our defensive metric, and this is not about the projection, it's just the defensive metric itself, DRP, deserved runs prevented, just doesn't particularly like him that much. And it's a disagreement between what Fangraphs use. It depends which thing you're looking at. I think Fangraphs uses a blend of DRS and OAA. I know they have something with OAA right now, but I'm not deep in on that. But his OAA is excellent. And he rates very well by some other defensive metrics as well. Ours is just, he's closer to league average. He was in 2024. He was a little bit below last year. That's something, honestly, I disagree with. Like, I've watched him play a lot. Obviously, his arm is tremendous. But I'm not sure specifically where that's coming out for him. Like, why I know what the metric does is it takes the ball in play and where it lands and assigns it to a particular fielder of who's supposed to get it and and it has a reasoning for that. I don't know which plays are causing that to skew him negative, but it doesn't. I would agree with you. That's low to me. It's not that's not a PECOTA issue. That's a DRP issue, but it's an issue of valid disagreement, I would say. I think he's a very good defensive shortstop. So that is one thing. Scott, I mean, he had a 10 DRP last year, which is incredibly high. That's really, really high, especially for, I mean, any non-catcher getting anything in double digits is really impressive. And I am looking at the projection, and that's a projection one I actually don't know. It's a really good question, and I'm happy to look into it. But he has a negative defensive projection, and that doesn't make any sense to me. So earnestly, that's one I'll have to look into, because again, he's got a limited track record in the majors. So sure, if you want to regress it some, like you're saying, maybe 5, maybe 4, +4, +5, something like that. He's got a negative one that doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm happy to come back to you on that one, but I earnestly can't explain that right now. That doesn't make any sense.
No, when you're talking about like the playing time stuff, and we look at these projections because we don't have anything else better to do while it's snowing and stuff outside and spring training, we need something to talk about because we get told spring training stats don't matter. So we got to find something to choose from. How do you look at the bullpen? Like, how much value and stuff, especially this Cardinals bullpen, which is just going to be a cycle? Like, is that just figured into why you just see so many guys at 2%, 7, 8? Like, it's impossible to project a bullpen at this point.
Right. Well, I think if you go through and look at a lot of our projections, many of them at the bottom end include a lot of these guys at 2%, because what we do is we go through and look at guys both on the 40-man and off the 40-man who are at a high level. And we know just a lot of that is just the churn of major league bullpens at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Cardinals, to your point, where they are we know this is not necessarily that they're planning to be competitive this year, right? So they're not going to necessarily lean on a guy for 75 innings because why would they? I mean, that's not what they're playing for this year. Even if they get a breakout bullpen arm, if I were them, I wouldn't necessarily push them all that hard. We've seen Patrick Dubuque, who's one of the writers at Baseball Prospectus, has done work of guys who has done some research on guys throwing 75 innings, and especially 75 innings 2 years in a row. And obviously that's an arbitrary kind of endpoint. But if you're at 70 innings 3 years in a row, there tends to be a real fall off. So you don't want to push these guys necessarily in a year that you're not planning on being competitive. So some of it is just based on that. Others is based on, like I said, the 40-man. If you're on there, there's a good chance you'll pitch. Just these guys cycle through bullpen arms. I was looking. I was talking to a friend of mine who was not a major baseball fan, but he was asking me some questions about it, and I was trying to explain to him like just how many more pitchers there are these days. And I sent him something I saw in Sam Miller's newsletter recently, and I should be able to pull it up real quick. But Keith Hernandez, this is from Sam Miller's newsletter. Keith Hernandez played 17 seasons in the majors and faced 593 different pitchers. Andrew McCutchen has played 17 seasons in the majors and last year faced his 1,500th different pitcher.
Wow.
Right? And that's like, that was shocking to me. And I know, like, I do have this internalized to some degree, but that is shocking, the difference there, right? So when we're looking at this stuff, and I've had to deal with this with like the annual, we tried to include, for years, we tried to be so inclusive. Anyone who really contributed to a team, right? A guy throwing 35 innings in the bullpen, I guess that's someone people know that year. These days, it's not. We can't keep up with it. It makes the book too long about these guys who are, and no offense to them, but relatively anonymous, right? Because it's just, there's so many guys throwing somewhere between 15 and 35 innings over the course of a season. And sometimes they're doing it across 4 or 5 different teams, right? They just get passed along on the waiver wire or whatever it might be. So that is a real tough. It's a tough situation for the depth charts team to figure out, like, who's going to matter, who's going to throw, who's going to throw 6 innings, and that's maybe 2%. I'm going off the top of my head, and who's going to throw, who's going to go from someone who looked like they were going to throw 2% is 13 innings, right? So that's the minimum we can give in a bullpen is 2%, and that's 13 innings. So it's just trying to figure that out. And again, to your point about the number of guys kind of clogging the bottom, it's just there are so many guys now. It's crazy. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm looking at your relief chart, and you've got 17 names listed, which does include Dustin May and Kyle Leahy. And that's probably going to be at least 20 guys for the Cardinals, I imagine. Not even including the 2 starters. Would you probably agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think you could absolutely add more people. I think you can also, I mean, there are almost certainly going to be guys they claim on waivers that are going to come through. I mean, it would honestly surprise me if we have 17 listed. Like, it's probably not hard to get to 25 guys over the course of a season, right? I mean, you also, like, we don't have Quinn Matthews with relief innings, but he could. Depends on how the season goes, right? I mean, I know I've been a fan of Matthews for a while now, so I made a point to go through his spring starts or his spring outings and watch him. And I hope he shows up and stays as a starter, right? But these young guys, you never know. And if he hits an innings limit, and the organization just wants to chill out at the end of a season because it's not necessarily going to be a season that is of the utmost importance for you to eke out every win. Maybe they put him in the bullpen for a little bit, right? And you soak up some innings that way. You never know. I mean, and honestly, like the designation of guys, you go from just openers to bulk guys to, is a bulk guy a starter? Is he a reliever? Like, how do you want to allot that? That's always an annoying thing to have to deal with on the depth charts front as well.
Two names I would recommend. I don't know if you want to pass this. Luis Gastelum and honestly Packy Naughton. I think they're both going to get innings this year at the major league level.
Yeah,
but because Gastelum only pitched at Springfield, but with his devastating changeup, struck out
Dude, that thing is crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much all he has, but it might be enough.
Well, no, and look, there's precedent for that too, right? I really liked Andre Granillo last year. If you want to go like sicko mode on like, I really liked him. I think he's like a fringe major leaguer, but like you kind of like him. I think he ended up on the Nats now, but he threw a slider like 70% of the time, 68% of the time, something like that. If you have a pitch as good as that changeup, you can throw it a lot.
We actually traded him for George Soriano, who
there you go,
which we were all confused by. But
yeah,
Soriano's having a really good spring. I will say
sure.
that. But we're still a little confused by trading for a guy with 0 options and hasn't been very good, for Granillo, who barely got a chance and has 2 options. But
right, exactly. You would think, right?
They did.
Again, given the situation of where the Cardinals are, you would think they would care more about the optionality, just the team control, like that kind of stuff. Then, yeah, right. I forgot it was Soriano going back. Yeah, weird trade.
When you do some of the projection stuff, and then you're looking at, again, I'm looking at the cross referencing stuff because we always are like, well, what are the computers? And we always want to find the fine mesh between the computers and the human side and all that stuff. Where understanding that the Cardinals also understand that winning isn't a priority, but the guys' leashes are going to be longer for certain people, and knowing that there's not going to be a managerial turnover, at least anticipating there's not going to be managerial turnover.
Well, they did extend him, right? So we should
exactly. So you would think that would be crazy to do there, but also knowing that trade deadline there might be active. Like, how does that figure into, like, is that where PECOTA was like 66 wins because they're going to offload so-and-so, but when you look at who they're going to offload, is that really worth X amount of wins on this team already?
No, that's a great question. I mean, the reality is, like, anything so this assumes the way the projection works is it assumes that these players are taking up the playing time that they're allotted on the team that they're on.
Okay.
And we just can't account for, I mean, I agree, like, you can look at it and say, like, okay, Dustin May, if he's healthy, is almost certainly going to get traded, right? Like, that is someone who there's no real good reason that they would hold on to him unless it was due to injury, in which case our projection is probably significantly off anyway. But he's someone who's very likely to get traded. But we can't put that. You could envision a scenario where you took his innings off of a team, but you would have no way to place it on another team because you don't know which one he would end up potentially going to, right? And so you would end up just creating kind of like holes. Ultimately, you could potentially remove it off of the Cardinals and be more accurate in that sense, but you'd still be missing the other half of it. It's just too much to balance at that point. So that's the other part, is like, especially, this isn't the Cardinals this year, but especially those fringe teams, right? Those teams that are going to be on the edge of a playoff spot, whether they sell or buy or even just hold, right? Like, that matters a lot to how the ultimate projection plays out. So we, as anyone will do, if we get a projection right, like, we're going to toot our own horn. And when we get them wrong, we can say like, oh, we can explain some of the reasons that takes place. But like, the reality is, even when we get it right, we've gotten it wrong, but it's also ended up in this in the area where we thought, right? Because almost all these teams move guys on and off the roster, and even significant guys on and off the roster over the course of a season. And so like, we might get the win total right, but it's a different version of math that got us there, right? Or a different just a different set of numbers that got us there. And so again, we'll toot our own horn for that, because you have to. It's, some of it's a marketing game, some of it's, give yourself a pat on the back. But ultimately, like, we're getting stuff wrong all along the way. And that's the fun. I mean, for me, that's the fun of it, is to look into what we got wrong and see like, well, what can we get better at systematically? We're going to get stuff wrong regardless, but where can we get better and how can we get better? And some of it does come down to depth charts. And again, like, I give all the credit in the world to our depth charts teams. It's hard to be on top of 30 teams or 20 teams or 10 teams, right, as they are, as in depth as you guys are going to know stuff they might not know, right? But they're always, they're always open to feedback. They're really, I annoy them. And even when I'm sending it, I'm like, just thinking out loud, because like, it has to be annoying to get stuff. But that's, the suggestions that you're making in terms of Packy Naughton and I'm not saying his name because I'm sure I'm going to screw it up. But like, those are really valid. That's good feedback, and that would help us, long term. And that's again where we miss a lot is playing time projections. Harry Pavlidis, who has been on our kind of stats and R&D team for a very, very long time, has consistently said like, standings projections are playing time projections. And it's just so hard to get that right. Now, it's not only those things, but when you look at like what matters more than anything else, it tends to be playing time.
So, well, I will say I don't think Gastelum or Naughton will significantly impact the win total, at least.
Probably not, but it's true. But that's true of like, every team probably has a few guys that we might not have on there that deserve to be on there, right? And that can, maybe it's not, relievers in general are not going to move the needle. I mean, that's the other thing. People like to say like, oh, after a signing, how much did Kyle Tucker move the needle? Or, maybe bad example because they're already up there, but right. But like, how much did Sonny Gray move the needle for the Red Sox or whatever? And like, the reality is it's like a win. But that's actually a lot. Like, if one player moves the standings projections a win over 1,000 sims on average, like, that actually ends up being quite a bit. And the reality is like, the standings tend to be very, or the projections for the standings tend to be very conservative, because we play out, what we actually get is in essence one real life version of a simulation, and the simulations can be wild. Like, if you really dig into it, Rob Maines, one of our writers, every year writes something called 100,000 PECOTA Under the Sea or something like that. I forget the title, but specifically, but he instead of doing 1,000 sims, we run 100,000 sims, and then he goes through this monster spreadsheet and pulls out the most interesting simulations and like how wild they can get, right? Like, he'll try and find one with the Dodgers in last place and the Rockies in first place. And I don't know if that one actually happened last year, but like, there will be stuff you would never expect, but it's like, in one simulation, this is how it worked out. And the real world that we get to see play out is just one of those things. And some wacky stuff can can happen, and you never know. You're going to get an 8-win season from someone that we never would have anticipated, but like that happens sometimes.
I think the Cardinals starting rotation is in a place where like it's all like almost everybody's very close to the same place. Do you have a guy where in your gut you're like, I think this guy's going to emerge as probably the better starting pitcher out of like the 10 guys that we have, who to me are all between 1 and 2 wins if they stay healthy? That's the other part of it. If the guy stays healthy, who do you think is going to be like, this projection is probably a little low?
So the projections on the pitchers are really low, and honestly surprised me a little bit. And I know this isn't a rotation that's like built to compete right now, but I was kind of surprised at how low I think as a rotation we have them at 7.3 WARP, which again is based on our deserved run average. It works a little bit differently than either FWAR or reference WAR or any of that. But one of the interesting things Matt Trueblood, another one of our writers, found recently when he was writing up some of he was looking at a few Milwaukee pitchers, specifically Aaron Ashby and Angel Zerpa, and there was a third, Quinn Priester, I think. And he noted that their DRAs were really good last year, right? What they actually produced was really good, and the projection was not good, or closer to league average, but it's significant. They were all significantly better than league average last year by DRA, and projected to be either league average or worse. And he was looking into the disconnect there, and we have to look into this, but I think he was on to something when he said, so DRA and especially PECOTA really like fly ball pitchers, because if you look at stuff like batting average on fly ball, it's really low, right? That's obviously where the slug is higher, right? But batting average is lower. So if you're a fly ball pitcher, you're really good at getting outs, and it probably regresses home runs somewhat, right? Again, because they tend to be these projection systems tend to be conservative. So it probably brings in outlier home run totals, maybe deservedly, maybe not. Whereas ground ball pitchers tend to run these higher BABIPs, right? And so even if you get really good results, PECOTA might say, well, I don't know if your infield defense is going to be as good as converting those ground balls into outs. It's out of your control. What we really care about in DRA and a lot of fielding and independent pitching stuff is what you can control, which is strikeouts and home runs and all of that kind of, and walks, and obviously. And so it tends to really knock ground ball pitchers and like fly ball pitchers in terms of the projections, even relative to what they've actually produced, right? And you look at St. Louis's rotation, and you've got Andre Payante, you've got Dustin May. Those two guys off the top of your head, huge ground ball guys, right? And Payante especially doesn't miss a ton of bats. So for something like PECOTA and DRA, they don't like him that much because he relies on the defense behind him, right? I think you can make a case. And again, then you have what our system thinks of Mason Wynn at shortstop, which I think is wrong, but it makes sense that it is projecting all of that kind of stuff for someone like Payante. I think you can make the case that Gorman back at his natural position, Mason Wynn at short, Weatherholt at second base. It projects Weatherholt at a neutral DRP because he hasn't played that in the majors. We don't have that, right? So, and he really mostly played short last year. I think he got 30 games at second base. You can make a case this is actually going to be a pretty good defensive infield for these guys, but the projection system is going to be a little bit more wary of that. And it is, again, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, it is skeptical of ground ball guys in the first place. So I realize I'm branching off your question in a different way, but those projections kind of surprised me at how low they were, but it makes sense if that is exactly what's happening with PECOTA. I've always been a Dustin May guy. I'm originally a Dodgers fan. I love Dustin May. So like, I'm tempted to answer your question with Dustin May. I don't think he can actually stay healthy is the big thing, but like, you will have starts where you will believe in Dustin May fully. When you get 97 with what feels like a mile of arm side run on a fastball, and you're going to think like, how is this guy not one of the best pitchers in baseball? And like, the Dustin May experience for me is he is one of the best pitchers in baseball for 5 innings, but he's throwing 6 innings. And the one is just whether it's his control that leaves him or sometimes just a hit getting through that shouldn't get through. He gets a lot of bad contact, and sometimes that bad contact just ends up as hits, and I think that gets in his head sometimes. I think those innings just pile up on him, and they're so frustrating as a fan too, because you'll get like that squibber off the inside of the bat, that inside out's just over the shortstop or whatever it might be, and it's bad contact, and he did his job, but that's baseball, right? And and it's also baseball because he gets so many of those balls in play. Because he's trying to, right? He's got this insane sinker that he wants the ball in play, but when it happens like that, you're like, oh, not like that. Why don't you try and miss a bat? If the St. Louis development team can get him more consistent on his slurve. He's been throwing a slurve, slider, something, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of in between. If he can hone that in either as a pitch or separate it into the curve, he came up as a 4-seam 12-6 curveball guy and turned into a completely east-west kind of guy. So like he's done a bunch of different things. There's so much talent in his arm. It's tempting for me to I think I would probably say him of the guys we have here. If I want to really dream, I'll say Quinn Matthews. I mean, I thought he looked so good in spring, and he didn't look wild like he was last year. The fastball was back at 94. I'm sure you guys have better info on him than me. You probably watched him a little more than I did, but I did make a point to try and go back and watch his outings, and just everything looked really good. The changeup looked better, slider looked really good, and last year was such a weird year, and if he can come back from that, I was really high on him going into last season, and I'd love to see him crack the rotation and rack up enough innings to set himself as a give himself something to step, a platform to go off of for next year, and actually have like a full season at the major league level there. 95, 97. Yeah, that's even better. So yeah.
Well, and it says that you said that we watched them. It's like, well, we actually have watched 0 of it because there's been 4, televised games this spring training. But I just like to bring that up as bitter as I want to be over the fact it's 2026.
I second you. Every single spring training game should be televised. It's absolute nonsense.
Just give us the live feed to center field.
Amen. Amen. But also you have 2 teams at every game. One of them should be able to broadcast it, and that broadcast should be available to they should just piggyback it for what I watched him against the Mets is I think the game I was able to see, because SNY broadcasts all or it might have been Picks or whatever, but they broadcast the spring training games. Again, you guys should be, the Cardinals should be able to show that to their fans, whether they're the one broadcasting or not. MLB should be enforcing this, that we're the diehard fans trying to catch every game. Don't you want to sell to us?
Grow the game, right?
Yeah.
But my question was kind of going to where you talked about, it's a marketing tool, our projection stuff. So when you talk about like the effectiveness of your projections, like do you say like our opening day projections compared to game 162, and then you do something within like a standard deviation of that, or is it's something that's updating all the time? So how does that work?
So it's both. I mean, great. It's a good question. It's both of those things, right? Because ultimately, what we're judged by, what people will judge us by, what we tend to judge ourselves by, is what are our opening day projections? It's the projection as of opening day, and then when I say like we missed by 17 games, I'm saying that compared to what the opening day projection was. Mm-hmm. But we do update them every single day in season. But we catalog what we were on opening day. And so that's what we judge ourselves by. That's what other people will absolutely judge us by. But we do, we run the sims, like I said, overnight, every single night. And we also, I don't remember specifically when it is now. It used to be we didn't flip to our so we have preseason projections, and then we have what we call rest of season projections. Mm-hmm. And our rest of season projections, I think we flip to them about a week into the season now
Oh, okay.
because as MLB has released more and more data, the signal on some of these things is really relevant much sooner than it used to be. And I think there have been studies, not specifically on ours, but on projections in general. Even if you include spring training data in a projection, it actually can be meaningful. It doesn't mean it's like significant, but it can still help in a number of ways. And I think, you mentioned spring training data, like, don't take it too seriously or whatever, right?
Mm.
And it's true, you don't want to take it too seriously. I always talk to my friends who are only a little bit less into this stuff than we are, and I'll say, like, spring training is every good thing that happens is real and every bad thing that happens is practice, right? Enjoy it, right? It's spring training. Just enjoy it. At the same time, there are things you want to see and care about. It might be that someone is throwing 2 miles per hour slower because they're just not putting everything into it. It might be that they were putting everything into it and they're not able to throw as hard. And which one of those things matters very significantly, right? But you can go back to Ben Rice last year, right? Ben Rice hit the hell out of the ball in all spring training. And it's one thing to say, like, oh, this guy's hitting 500. I think, again, I follow a lot of Dodgers stuff. Like, Santiago Espinal is hitting like 470 right now. I don't think that's particularly meaningful. I think he looks great, don't get me wrong, but I think we're getting a really good couple weeks of Santiago Espinal, and he's going to make the team because of it. God bless, whatever. But Ben Rice was setting max exit velocity records for himself. He was consistently hitting the ball really, really hard. Those kind of things, especially relative to your previous performance, if you start seeing those markers tick up, that's relevant. And that matters. And that's something you can look into. And it doesn't mean you have to buy in whole hog right now. A lot of times these numbers are coming off of AA pitchers, AAA pitchers. And if this is a guy who was in the majors last year, he's, maybe he's used to better stuff and he's beating up on worse competition. We want to be cautious in that, but that doesn't mean we throw all of it out either. And so part of the reason again, I think it's a week. I think it's a week into the season that we flip it from preseason to rest of season, because we start getting a lot of that data, right? Where and again, it becomes meaningful. If a guy is adding 3 miles per hour to his average exit velocity, or what I really like to look at is 90th percentile exit velocity, right? If they are consistently hitting the ball much harder, well, that's something that we're going to start to take notice of, and we should start to take notice of earlier than, I think we used to flip it like way back in June, that you would start, because again, the data was not as hyper focused. We weren't getting max exit velocity. We were getting results instead of process. Exit velocity, it is a result, but it's also a process, right? And so we were just getting outcomes, whether they were hitting for average, whether they were hitting for power, stuff like that. That kind of stuff takes a lot more time to normalize, to be meaningful, right? And we've done studies on that. Russell Carlton, who recently retired from writing every week for us, had long done a study on reliability, when these things became reliable, and that was 40 games into a season. So again, that's easily into the second month of the season, and that doesn't mean predictive. That just means the data you were seeing, you could trust that it was saying what it was saying, right?
So I'm connecting 2 of your points, which is spring training results and how playing time might screw up your overall results, which is in the form of Nelson Velasquez for the Cardinals, who this spring has batted 300 with 4 home runs and has double the walks to strikeouts, previously being a guy who strikes out about 28% of the time in his major league career. He went to the Mexican League last year. As far as I know, destroyed it. Would PECOTA be paying attention to Velasquez's results so far and consider it significant as far as what to expect this year?
No, good question. So PECOTA doesn't take into account spring training data right now. It's something that we've talked about. We haven't done, like I said, I think there have been some studies on other projection systems, or possibly it was on several projection systems. So I don't think it was just one. It could have included PECOTA, but that if they had been included, it would have enhanced, and this is, again, I think this was in The Economist. This was a few years ago. So even then, you've updated what you've put into the model and stuff like that since then. Almost all of them have. But I do think we're leaning towards, and I don't mean Baseball Prospectus specifically, but more of like the community of people who do projections, that the more information that you can get, it tends to be a positive. We do test things, and again, Jonathan Judge can speak to this a little bit better than I can, but he does look at various the new metrics that we get access to from MLB and stuff like that. He will look at whether they improve projections or not. He does. I think he calls them retrodictions, right? So he takes like 2025, since that was completed in the off season, and say, like, if I put this metric in there to does it enhance what our projections would have been compared to what they actually did, right? And whether it does or doesn't determines whether we incorporate it going forward, because we don't. It's easy to say more information is better, but sometimes it can be confounding. Sometimes it can be noisy. There are a lot of reasons you might potentially not want to do that. So as it stands, PECOTA does not incorporate spring training stats into it. But once they start playing in the majors every day, like I said, we're much quicker to switch the flip onto rest of season projections, because that data is more meaningful. And part of the reason you might want to wait until the season starts is you get major leaguers versus major leaguers, and you're not looking at necessarily Nelson Velasquez, who I mean, I remember he's come up and hit for the Royals. He's played for a few other teams. He's major power guy. Look, if he's going to start walking 2-1, that's a real major leaguer, right? I don't know if that's real, and you'd probably want to look at the quality of his competition, all of that kind of stuff. But walk rate, again, that's something that you go back to the Russell Carlson studies that he's done. That's going to take around 40 games before you can even say this is a reliable sample of a walk rate over those games that have already happened. That doesn't mean you can start saying, okay, those 40 games have happened, we can take this as fact and project forward at this new level now. All it means is we're confident over 40 games that this is saying what actually happened actually is justifiably what happened.
All right. It looks like Jake's got one question in here, and then we can wrap this thing up. Are there any Cardinals who are presenting those encouraging markers that you kind of referenced a little bit ago that might be progressing towards either the playing time projection or where PECOTA might be a little low on them?
It's a great question. I honestly, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to pull that up on Savant or something like that. I just don't know. But I will tell you, the guys I would be looking for, right, are, and I wrote up like Victor Scott. Victor Scott needs to hit the ball harder. He needs to impact the ball. The exit velocities that he puts out are so far below what you would ever consider for a major league guy. And in one of the weirdest things is you look at his average launch angle, which there are a lot of reasons that average is not necessarily what you want to do with launch angle. But even if you just look at his fly ball, line drive, and ground ball ratio, his ground ball rate is, I think, under 40%. Again, I'm going off the top of my head. Feel free to correct me on that. But this is a guy who, because of his speed, should be putting the ball on the ground a lot more. He should not be trying to hit fly balls, right? Because he doesn't hit the ball hard enough. I think his average exit velocity, I think, was like, his 90th was under 100, which again, like league average 90th exit velocity is like 104. So if you're at 4 miles per hour off league average, you're just not making, you're not able to do enough damage. And again, going back to what we said about like what PECOTA likes with fly ball pitchers, if you don't impact the ball and you're hitting it in the air, you're making outs, right? Unless you are specifically dropping it into that little donut hole between second and right field, or shortstop and left field, or I guess right over second base, like you're just hitting into weak fly ball outs. And so if he's not going to hit the ball harder, he has to put it on the ground where he can impact the game with his legs, where he can put pressure on the defense. And again, we don't see a lot of that profile anymore, but that's the only way it's going to work if he's not going to hit the ball any harder. And then you have like the flip side of that with Jordan Walker, which I don't, maybe the ship has sailed on Jordan Walker, but he hits the ball so hard. I mean, like if you were just getting into average exit velocity, max 90th, his 90th is off the charts. He hits the ball so hard, but he swings and misses too much, obviously. And then when he does make contact, it's in the ground. And he's not fast. So especially if he comes up with a guy on base and he hits the ball hard in the ground, look, it's not the worst thing to hit the ball hard in the ground because you can get a lot of hits that way. But defenses play him really far back because he's not fast. And so they're able to cover more ground that way. And you're able to turn a lot of double plays if there's someone on base in front of him because of his speed and because the ball gets to these guys so quickly and it's on the ground. So those are guys with like completely inverse issues. And you need them to start trading either contact and launch angle and exit velocity profiles, or they need to change what they're doing within those specific things, right? Like it's possible Victor Scott could be a below average offensive performer, but very worthwhile from a defensive perspective. If he can not be a 70 DRC plus, if he could be an 85 DRC plus with his defense, that might be playable, but he might need to do that. He might need to, he might need to just hit the ball on the ground a lot more, and part of that is like swing speed, right? Like I think his percentile is under 10%, something like that. He's in the bottom decile of swing speed is 67%. So he's making sure he's making a lot of contact, right? That's tends to be the trade-off. If you have a slow swing, you're usually making more contact. You can see Luis Arraez does that, but Luis Arraez also puts the barrel of the bat on the ball consistently. His max exits are low, but not as low as Victor Scott. And he might need to trade. Look, if he can add a few miles per hour of exit velocity on some of his swings, if he swings harder, that might be a worthwhile trade-off for him. But the Cardinals, again, this is the problem the Cardinals are going to have to figure out. I don't know specifically what's happening in terms of those markers in spring training for the Cardinals. It's a great question. But those are the guys I would be looking at of what are they doing relative to their baselines and how are they doing? And you could look, we talked about Mason Wynn. If he can hit it in the air a little bit more, maybe he gets a little more slug. That's going to be meaningful for him, things like that. But those are the guys I would be looking at and seeing how those are changing throughout spring training.
I don't think either of those got any of those markers, but
thank you for answering the question, Craig. It was unfortunately really the only question I was able to ask as, I continue to battle through some of these technical issues over here. But, thank you for coming on and joining us and for imparting all of the great wisdom of that comes with Craig Goldstein and Baseball Prospectus and all of the tools available to you. So thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate your time, and we'll make sure to have you on again in the let's do a mid-season check-in with you, and we'll kind of check in and see how PECOTA is doing on its projections and kind of where things are kind of going right or wrong in a mid-season form.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure to talk with you guys. I apologize again for rambling so much, but once again, I really love talking baseball. I honestly love talking the Cardinals. I've been I'm a Dodgers fan, whatever. But it's been a fascinating organization for a really long time. I know it might not be their year in terms of the standings, but there's as I wrote in my preview, I think there's a lot to watch for this year, even knowing that going in. So I'm looking forward to keeping track of them.
Hey, no apologies necessary. We are a long form show, so like you're in the exact right place to doing all of that. So awesome. Scott, Gabe, thank you guys for stepping in and pitch hitting for me and taking care of business while I try to attend to the lifeboat that is videoless podcasting at the moment. Good news, Cardinals fans. Well, I don't know, it's good or bad, but the new memory stick is coming in the mail. This will be not an issue going forward, but today you get to suffer through it one more time. So Scott, Gabe, guys, thank you again for being here. We'll jump in next week with Matt Pauley of 1120 KMOX, and the Cardinals will be departing from spring training on that day as they head to Springfield for their annual game against not necessarily annual Battle of the Birds, but last year they did it with Memphis. This year they're doing it with Springfield and that kind of exhibition before they start the season. But thank you guys for being here. Next week, again, we'll talk to 1120 KMOX pre and post host Matt Pauley, for Craig Goldstein of Baseball Perspective, for Gabe Simons of Viva Albertos, for Scott Plaza of Viva Albertos and Redbird Rundown. We will talk to you all next week. Thank you so much for listening and have a great week.